Hey, this is Michael Lindsay, and we're out here with the 2019 KTM 450 SXF Factory Edition. We're going to take a few minutes to run through all the tech changes on this bike. If you're looking for my actual opinions on this motorcycle, hit the link below and it'll take you into that. We're going to go and spend a few minutes though breaking down each change, not really wasting our time in the other video. So, as I said, this is the factory edition. KTM about every 3 years on this run has been doing a bike that is basically all new. That's what we had last year, a bike with a new frame, updated cylinder head that was shorter, changes to the head pipe, exhaust, ECU, suspension, all that, and all the body work as well. So usually the second year after that with the factory edition, since the bike isn't really all new leading into the production model, they go through and do some more anodized bits, some hard parts. And with what I would say is kind of a little bit of a play off Honda doing the Works Edition, KTM has stepped up their game this year with what's available on the bike. So you'll kind of see from the outward appearance, you have the typical Red Bull KTM look, the graphics, the seat cover that comes with that. They have a Power Parts triple clamp on here, this split. And the reason for that isn't just looks, it's actually because of how you can set the torque on the triple clamps. Typically, if you over torque the lower clamp, the lower tube actually binds up a little bit when it goes through the upper tube and causes a little bit of mid-stroke harshness. By switching to this clamp, the way this actually torques on the lower tube is a little bit different and allows you to be a little bit off. If you're not really precise with your torque figures, it can be a little bit higher than the spec listed, which is 12 Newton meters, and the tube will still slide through a little bit more freely. And this also changes as the bike is in action, as the front end is under bind, going backwards, say under heavy braking, under loads. When it torques that tube, it still gives it a little bit more clearance. So the overall goal is to keep it a little bit more hassle-free when you're actually setting the initial torque figure, but it also helps the performance of the bike under motion while it's binded up in ways you don't normally think of. The suspension settings themselves have been changed in the fork. There is a new damping rod piston. They've actually changed the initial shim on the stack as well. They've done a dimpling process, and the idea is to get the shim to flex easier. The change they did to the frame last year, while there was some positives by stiffening it in certain places for feel, it also for some riders gave away a little bit of that initial feel on the front end because of the stiffness of the chassis. They wanted to try to get the fork to move a little bit easier now. By changing that initial shim, it now breaks its tension quicker under loads. So the idea is to get the fork to just kind of settle through that initial feel a little bit easier and not feel as topped out and held up in the stroke. If you look at the suspension, it also says exact on it. That doesn't mean we have a new fork or shock technology. It's actually a rebranding by WP going into this year. This is still the AER 48 air fork. It's a separate function style system. You basically have your air pressure, force on one side, your spring force on the other. That's really unchanged. It's just a marketing term. Same with the shock. You'll just see exact is all their motocross product related going forward. Explorer is all their off-road, and they have another naming culture for their street product. They just kind of wanted to separate those. But no, this is basically the same technology suspension they've been using the past few years, but it does have updates. From there, internally in the engine, they've gone back to a CP piston. They've just been changing suppliers the last couple years, trying to find what works best. We're back to a CP product this year. The Penkel rod has a copper bushing at the top where it meets the piston pin to try to relieve some friction. And then at the top end of the engine, the finger followers have been changed. They've been lightened, so they move a little bit freer and allows the bike to spool up a little bit quicker since there's less hold up on the engine, less inertia to brake, and less basically force of metal to move. But the rocker arms themselves are also stiffer to try to keep it so they're a little bit more precise on the valve actuation, and so they don't kind of wear and flex as much, so it's a little bit more precise when you're also checking the valve clearance on them. From there, a few other things they've added. They have their own wheel set now. This is an in-house KTM Power Parts, so you've actually got a billet hub that's anodized now. They have a little bit different spoke crossing on the front to try to make it a little bit stronger in stock. We do have an Akrapovic slip-on this year. They didn't have that last year. They went with a production muffler. Like I said, the second and third year of a factory edition of a generation, you'll usually see a muffler edition. This will free it up a little bit up top. KTM stock mufflers are usually a little bit on the choke down side. They try to meet more worldwide standards than just the US, albeit in saying that, the KTM usually does have its own US muffler spec for the 450. Overall from there, the ECU settings are actually exactly the same as the prior 19 model. So really any engine updates this bike or feel will be produced by the difference of the muffler and the few small internal changes they've made mechanically. There is an additional front floating wave rotor from Galfer, just a few other bits on the bike. I always have a lot of people bring up, you know, what these bikes are meant for. There's people that definitely complain sometimes about the price. They sell out every year. They're really not targeted towards the person with the budget. They're the person that wants the new 6 months early. They want some additional parts on it, stuff they don't want to go out and buy. If you actually price out having nice clamps, wheels, the exhaust, it is more expensive to buy the standard bike and do this. But also at the same time, if you like what we hear about the updates in the engine and just throughout the bike, usually you can wait a couple months and pick up the normal production bike if you're definitely working more on the budget side. Hey, want to stay in touch with the latest motocross and off-road bike tech and product launches, along with my thoughts and reviews on the bikes? Make sure you hit the subscribe button. It'll keep you in the loop because we'll be putting out plenty of content this year.